Okay, welcome to part one, video one on how to learn songs by ear on piano. So just a little disclaimer, this video is for anyone, but you do have to know the note names on a piano before you could understand what's going to happen in part one. So if I play this note and you don't know what that's called, it's an E flat, by the way, but you would need to know that before being able to understand anything in part one. So this tutorial is mostly aimed at learning pop songs on piano, but it could also be useful for jazz music or for classical music too. And it's definitely geared for pianists, but there's definitely some information on here that would be useful if you played guitar or another instrument that can play chords too. So in part one, we're going to be talking kind of pretty heavily on music theory. We're going to be talking about the chords that are in the key or diatonic chords in major and minor keys. In part two, we're going to be talking about common chord progressions using mostly Roman numerals. So if you have maybe already taken like a college music theory course, you could maybe skip to part two or part three already. And then the last part, part three, is when we're kind of going to get into the specific details of tips for learning music by ear. So definitely part one and part two are kind of music theory heavy. It's sort of a necessary evil for being able to learn songs by ear. But if you already kind of have music theory down, then maybe you could just skip to the third video, part three. So I hope you enjoy this series. And yeah, let's get started. Before we get started, we need to talk about something called half steps and whole steps. You'll sometimes hear these referred to as tones and semitones. That means the same thing, just in this video I'll be calling them half steps and whole steps. So as we look at the piano, from C to C, in order to ascend in pitch, we kind of have to do this jigsaw motion between the white keys and the black keys like this. And that's how we ascend in pitch. But that smallest interval, for instance from C to C sharp or from E to F, you'll notice there's no note between them. It is the smallest interval that I can travel on the piano. We call that a half step, okay? So here's a half step, half step, half step, half step, half step, and so on. And you can also do half steps downwards, right? Half step, half step, half step, half step, and so on. Now, a whole step is two half steps put together. So if I go from C, skip C sharp and D, that is a whole step. And I can keep continuing this process. So now I'll go from D, skip E flat and go to E, skip F, skip G. So those are whole steps. I can also do that same process. I'll start on C sharp. Notice I'm skipping a note between every time. So skip a note, whole step, whole step, whole step. So now that we've talked about whole steps and half steps, we can begin to talk about major and minor scales and the formulas that make them up. So what is a scale? A scale is basically a collection of pitches that are used to make melodies in pop songs. I kind of think of scales as like they're the building blocks to music. They're the building blocks to songs, or at least in most genres of music, that's the case. So a collection of pitches. Here's an example of a major scale. This is the C major scale. Now that major scale actually follows a very specific formula of whole steps and half steps. Okay, so I start on C, and then I have a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. And every single major scale is going to follow that formula. You'll notice that I also have it posted up here. So it's whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And that's going to be for every major scale. I will also continue to put diagrams like this up there to help you through the video. So let's now take what we know about the major scale formula and apply that to other keys than just C, because C is kind of the easy one, right? It's all the white keys. So let's try the key of D now, okay? So if I'm following this formula, I start on D and I go whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Okay, so I'm going to play that all together now. And you'll notice that that time in that scale, now I used F sharp and C sharp. I started to incorporate some of the black keys. Let's try another key. Let's do E now. Okay, so E, then I gotta go whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. And this is how all of your major scales are made. So what I would encourage you to do is try starting on different notes on your piano and try to play the major scales. See if you can get them to sound fluid. Let's talk about the minor scale now. So the minor scale is going to follow a slightly different formula, but similar to the major scale, every single minor scale is going to follow this formula. So I'm going to start on C. For the minor scale formula, we're going to go whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. I'll play that all together now. Another way that you can think of the minor scale is take your major scale. So let's do our C major scale. I'm just going to press down all the notes. Okay, take that scale and take your third scale degree, so that would be E, your sixth scale degree A, and your seventh scale degree B. So all of those need to go down a half step. So instead of E, we have E flat. Instead of A, we have A flat. Instead of B, we have B flat. That is now our minor scale. So whichever way is easier for you to think of it, either the formula or a major scale with a lowered third, sixth, and seventh degree, that's your minor scale. I want to take some time to go through some minor scales just so you understand this concept better. So let's start with A minor. Now here's a little tip for you. Remember when I said earlier that C major is an easy scale because it uses only the white keys? Well, in the minor scales, A is our easy key because A minor uses only the white keys. So when I did that scale, we can look at our minor scale formula and see how I did that. So I started on A, and then I did a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. And that made up our scale. Another way you can visualize it is if I was to go through my A major scale, these, by the way, the numbers I'm referring to here is just numbering each scale degree. So starting on A is 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we can take our A major scale and we can flatten the third scale degree, C sharp, which becomes a C. Our F sharp becomes an F, and then our G sharp becomes a G. And now we're playing all white keys. Let's take a look at one more minor key. So let's do D minor. Okay, so for that one, my formula, I start on D, I did whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole. Or another way you can look at it, once again, take our D major scale, and then we need to flatten 3, we flatten 6, and we flatten 7. This next part of the video is one of my favorite things about music theory because once I learned this, everything just kind of clicked for me in terms of how songs are made and how chords basically come to be. So you have to learn your major and minor scales, but once you know that, you can really go far with this concept. So if I take my C major scale and I number it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, what we're going to do is we're going to play scale degrees 1, 3, and 5 at the same time. That is called a triad, okay? So every triad is going to have a root, which is the lowest note in this case, a third, and the fifth. And what we're going to do is we're just going to take this shape up in the key of C major. Okay, so I just played 1, 3, 5. Here's my next triad. It's going to be scale degrees 2, 4, and 6. 2, 4, 6. Okay, now let's go 3, 5, and 7, and so on. whenever I take my C major scale and I put it in triads like I just did before, that is called harmonizing the C major scale. And every single chord in any key is going to have names for those chords. Okay, so you can follow along with me in the diagram up here. Our first chord in C major, it's always going to be 1, 3, and 5. When I say the numbers, I'm just referring to the scale degrees. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So 1, 3, and 5. That chord is called C major. Now, when I move my hand up and I play 2, 4, and 6, that is called D minor. That's what that little M means up there. The next chord's D minor. Then we have E minor. Then we have F. Then we have G. Then A minor. And then if you're following along up there, that little circle there, that symbol means diminished. This last chord is called a B diminished chord. And then we have C. Okay, so now the secret to learning pop songs is you need to be able to find out what these chords are, what they're called, and you need to be able to do that in every single key, which takes a really long time and a lot of practice. But let's just do another example. So now we're going to try learning the chord names in the key of D. Remember, if we use our formula for D major, we had whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So we had an F sharp and a C sharp in the key of D, which means that our chords have to have F sharps and C sharps in them whenever we're making triads. Okay, so this is kind of a tricky thing for me to teach, because what you need to do is you need to be very comfortable with what your scale degrees are in that key. Okay, so in D major, I need to know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so our first triad is always going to be 1, 3, 5. Our next triad's always going to be 2, 4, 6, and then 3, 5, 7, and so on, okay? So the chord names now, the first one is going to be D major. The next one is going to be E minor. The third one, remember, our key of D has a F sharp and a C sharp, so we have to play F sharp, A, C sharp. That's what 3, 5, and 7 are in the key of D. Our next one is G, then A, then B minor. Then we have a C diminished chord. If it's hard to see the notes because my hand is in the way, I'm playing C sharp, E, G, and then we're back to D. So I'll play those together now. And try practicing this in other keys too. So I'll do it in G major now. At this point in the video, if you haven't had a chance to go and try harmonizing some major scales on your own, I would definitely recommend that you do that, because it will make it a lot easier to understand as we add kind of more and more layers to this. So what I want you to look at right now are these Roman numerals at the bottom. And these are kind of like a formula. What they are showing is that the capital Roman numerals for 1, 4, and 5 mean that those chords in a major key are always going to be major chords, okay? The lowercase Roman numerals, like 2, 3, 6, and I'm going to skip 7 for a moment, those three are always going to be minor chords in a given key. The last one, 7, once again has the little circle, so that means that one's always a diminished chord. Okay, so if you're looking at the key of D, our first chord was a D major chord, which you can just shorten and call a D chord. The second one was a minor chord, E minor. The third one, that was F sharp minor, that was a minor chord. We had G, that was a major chord, and so on. The nice thing about this formula is it applies to literally any key. So let's try the key of B flat once. Okay, in B flat, my scale degrees, I have B flat, C, D, E flat, F, G, A, B flat. So if I harmonize this, my scale degrees 1, 3, and 5, those are going to make up a major chord. My scale degrees 2, 4, and 6, they're always going to make up a minor chord, okay? We know that scale degree 3, that one is going to be also minor. 4 has to be major, so that's an E flat major chord. Then we have an F major chord. Then we're going to have a G minor chord. We're going to have an A diminished chord. And then finally, we're going to have a B flat major chord. So far in the video, we've been talking about harmonizing major scales. Let's now try harmonizing some minor scales. So let's start with our easy one, A minor, which is just all the white keys from A to A. Okay, so first thing we're going to do, we're going to make our triads. So we're going to start with scale degrees 1, 3, and 5 in the key of A minor. Okay, and follow along with me up here. So our first chord is going to be A minor. Then we have B diminished. That's scale degrees 2, 4, and 6. Okay, then we're going to have C, then D minor, then E minor, then F, then G, and then back to A minor. Okay, we can do that same thing. Let's do it in another key. Let's try C minor. So remember, in C minor, we have that E flat. We also have an A flat and a B flat. Okay, so in C minor, let's do scale degrees 1, 3, and 5. E flat is scale degree 3. So our first chord is C minor. Now let's do scale degrees 2, 4, and 6. That's our D diminished chord. Okay, now we have 3, 5, and 7. That's going to be E flat. Then we have F minor, G minor, A flat. I'm going to move my hand so you can see my fingers a little better. A flat, then B flat, and then we're back up to C minor. So similar to the major keys, you'll notice that there's kind of a Roman numeral formula that any single minor key is going to follow. So for instance, the first chord in a minor key is always going to be minor. The third chord in a minor key is always going to be major. Okay, so let's try a different key. Let's do D minor. Remember, that one has a B flat in it. So our first chord, 1, 3, and 5, it's going to be minor. If we were to skip to our 3 chord, we know that that one has to be, it starts on the 3rd scale degree, which is F, and it has to be a major chord, so it's going to be an F major chord. So if we were to harmonize the D minor scale, we'd have D minor, E diminished, F major, we'd have G minor, A minor, then we'd have B flat major, C major, and D minor. The last thing I want to talk about in part 1 of this video is chord inversions. So let's take our C major chord. Remember, that was scale degrees 1, 3, and 5 in the key of C. Now, those notes are C, E, and G. But we don't necessarily have to play them in that order. We don't always have to have a C on the bottom. We can take this C and we can actually move it up here. That is called an inversion. Similarly, we can make G the bottom note. So we can take this E and move it up to here. So now I'm playing G, C, E. So what makes this chord a C chord really has nothing to do with C being at the bottom. It just has to do with the combination of the notes C, E, and G together. Okay, similarly, let's take another chord. Let's do D minor. Okay, so that one is D, F, and A, but it doesn't have to be in that order, right? We can take A and we could move it down here. So now I'm playing A, D, F. That is still a D minor chord. Okay, so that's something I just wanted to make you aware of, is that even though it might be voiced differently and there might be a different bottom note, it's still a D minor chord if it has the notes D, F, and A in it. The last thing I want to talk about is a way that I like to learn songs and how I kind of like to voice my chords. So usually whenever I am trying to learn songs on piano, I usually like to do a triad in my right hand, and then I like to do the root of the triad in my left hand down here an octave. Okay, so that's a great way to make a good pop sound on the piano. I can do that with my D minor chord, so now my left hand's playing D, and then my right hand's doing DFA. And when you're doing this, you don't have to do it in what's called root position, where in your right hand D is at the bottom. You can do other inversions, so I might do D minor like this. Okay, so those just give you some ideas of simple ways you can voice chords when you're playing them on piano.